The claim I'm responding to today is that high school basketball players should be allowed to go straight to the NBA. My opponent's secondary claims were requiring them to attend college affects their family's financial situation. The college attendance requirement increases the chance of the player getting injured, and going pro right out of high school teaches the athlete to mature faster. The topic of discussion, where this argument came from, is the collective bargaining agreement on the NBA's website. And in there it says that U.S. players must be at least 1 year removed from high school and 19 years of age by the end of that calendar year before entering the draft. His first claim is irrelevant because the CBA on the NBA's website says nothing about how a person who wants to go into the NBA has to go through college. Yeah. And his second claim is a college attendance requirement increases the chances of the player getting injured. Again, there is no requirement for high school basketball players to go through college before joining the NBA. And his third point, going pro right out of high school teaches the athlete to mature faster. He supports that by saying letting them out in the real world teaches them to grow up faster. By hanging out with grown men, he says that their habits will rub off on the newbie, but how will that help the newbie? You don't know if the habits of these grown men are good or bad, and what if they're terrible? And he also supports this by saying it teaches them how to handle their money. Going from rags to riches overnight from joining the NBA, it'll have its effects. They won't know how to spend their money, but if they went to college before they joined the NBA during that year that they can't, then they can take classes on how to deal with their money. So my opponents claim high school basketball players should be allowed to go straight to the NBA isn't very strong because his supporting claims weren't really relevant. Yeah.
All right, you're labeling the claims pretty clearly, so that should be easy to follow. You kind of make a reference at the beginning to the historical document, that it is the collective bargaining agreement, that they've got to be 1 year removed from high school and 19. I think the confusion here seems to stem from the idea of college. What would they be doing in that 1 year? The vast majority of basketball players coming out of high school that are good would probably be going to college. You're right, it's not a requirement that they go to college. They could sit on their ass for a year before they got drafted, but what's the likelihood of that being successful? I think you're missing another opportunity here, especially if there's a financial incentive. Is there any competition to the NBA? Is there any place else that people who are out of high school don't want to go to college and could play and earn money and be able to develop the way that they're talking about, could be able to do that? There are leagues in other parts of the world, for instance, that might be happy to have these players. I'm not sure. The other argument I think that you start to make at the end is that there is some need for high school students to get some college experience. I think you need to develop that argument a little bit more. You've got this vague idea, well, if they go to college in their first year, maybe they'll learn how to handle their money. I don't know if any of you are going to feel after you finished your first year that you're going to be able to handle millions of dollars. You probably be able to spend millions of dollars, but it'll go pretty quickly. What you need to figure out is planning and investment and those kinds of things. I don't know that you can get that after a year, especially if it's your first year. So I think you need to be a little bit careful about that. I think the other thing is that you might want to point out that there are rare exceptions for these people who are doing that. Are there cases where people become good players in high school and can automatically get in? Well, you've got the 4 or 5 examples that the advocate mentions. But there are plenty of people who weren't able to do that, and then they're not able to play, for instance, in college if they didn't get, if they lose their job in the NBA because they've used up, they don't have amateur status anymore, they've been paid for that kind of thing. They can't go back and say, well, let me play college ball here and develop. You screwed up. You made a bad choice at that particular point. So I made myself eligible for the draft. Well, now you're ineligible for playing in the NCAA. And that's a potential problem. I'm surprised that you don't look for examples of a lot of high school prospects who went to college and got a heck of a lot better because of going to college. Michael Jordan coming out of high school was not the greatest phenomenon in the world. In fact, I think the first year in high school he got cut from his basketball team. In college, though, he began to become a standout. It wasn't until his last year that he was who everybody finally knew he was going to be. But why would people want to deny themselves the opportunity of that? If they've got examples, you ought to be able to use counterexamples to illustrate those points. And so it just feels like it's a little bit thin. And at the end, you sound like you're kind of giving up on the argument, too. All right. Thank you.